So, I was watching Frame Game's most recent Risk stream. It's number 3 for anybody who gets to this couple of weeks after the video comes out. And in the Risk stream, uh, Frame Game goes through news, he answers viewer questions, and he and a panel of his audience discuss whatever topics come up. And this week, Frame Game received a lot of emails and DMs from people asking about uh, Eric Klopper's presentation at Harvard. Frame Game reflected on this, saying that the arguments he made were interesting, but Eric, Mr. Klopper, came off really manic, and he kind of screwed with his persuasiveness by sticking melon? An eggplant down his pants, and then removing his shirt halfway through and throughout the show, variously unzipping and rezipping and doing all these things with his pants. And he's a real muscular guy, and that, I'll admit, it was kind of distracting. Um, anyway, but Frame Game said that he would be interested in hearing these some of these arguments from a perhaps less impassioned perspective, or just maybe somebody who's not so manic. So I'm going to take a crack at some of the arguments that I could come up with against circumcision. I've tried to do it in a pretty logical way. Some parts of the presentation don't quite fit. We'll see how it goes. I feel really strongly about this topic, but I'm going to try to set that aside because Frame Game, I think he's a corporate lawyer, he's real evidence-based, and my goal after some initial discussion is to just let the evidence of the timeline of circumcision justification speak for itself. So my personal arguments. Oh, one more thing. Eric Klopper did a presentation on this. I'm doing mine. I think the best one that's come out is a video called Elephant in the Hospital, put together by Ryan McAllister, PhD in physics at Georgetown, I think. So you can find that on YouTube. It's probably better than what you're going to see here, but this is my take on it. So the 4 arguments that I aim to present and sort of work my way around is any part of the body can be removed to prevent infection. That's number 1. Number 2, amputation without medical indication. That is, without some compelling reason to perform a surgery. Some evidence of infection or disease is ethically objectionable for minors. Point number 3. The boy should get to choose what happens to his penis, and we should consider a ban for minors to ensure this outcome. And point number 4 is just going to be a history of the practice, and this is the second take, the first time I forgot to do voiceover mode. So I know from experience that point 4 is going to be the majority of the video. It's pretty dry and pretty long, so stick with it as long as you can. I think the evidence speaks for itself, so it's pretty much just going to be me reading through some headlines and statements from the medical community. Okay, on the left we have the body parts that can potentially become infected and diseased, and as you can see, the entirety of the person on the left is highlighted. That is, you can get an infection in any area of your body. On the right, we have highlighted the parts that are prophylactically amputated in infancy to prevent potential infection and disease. Oh, and it's just the foreskin. Okay. Now, I'm going to get into some stories of other parts of the body that have been prophylactically amputated. So we're going to start with women who've been circumcised. Jumping down in this article. A study in Tanzania found no association between female cutting and HIV status, and research on sex workers in West Africa found that female cutting was associated with negative HIV status. So the more West African prostitutes get circumcised, the fewer West African prostitutes get HIV. And as prostitutes, these are people who are at particularly high risk. So that's interesting. Kanki, the story I've heard is that Kanki, who authored this study, was trying to find the opposite. But this is what her data showed, so this is what she published. There's another case of that, which is Stallings et al. Again, I believe this woman was a feminist. She wanted to show that there was no benefit to female circumcision because, and this is sort of a little known fact in the West, but in the areas where they practice female circumcision, they do it for cleanliness, or they say they do it for cleanliness, and they say they do it to prevent infection. This gross pink screenshot you're looking at is a section of Stallings', I presume it's her PhD thesis. The original article has been memory holed. It's no longer on the internet. All I can find of Stallings' work is this pink monstrosity. So in the discussion slide, she said, the surprising and perplexing significant inverse association between reported female circumcision and HIV seropositivity remained highly statistically significant in the final logistic regression model, despite the presence of other significant potential confounders, namely geographic zone, household wealth index, woman's age, lifetime sex partners, and current or past union status. So they took out all these confounding variables, and they still found if you're circumcised and female, you're less likely to have HIV. So some questions at this point. If circumcision of boys is justified by claims of HIV reduction, even though the evidence is controversial, should female genital cutting, FGM, female genital mutilation, also be considered justified, given some evidentiary suggestion of reduced HIV transmission? This is an issue that the medical community has actually addressed with varying results. We'll see that in the timeline. Further, where does society's acquiescence to parents' rights end? This common argument seems to imply that it's the family's penis rather than the boy's. And even if it is initially the family's penis, I would put forth that someday it's going to be just the boy's penis, and maybe he should have a say in it. And finally, where does this end? Where does the justification for male genital cutting end? I think you should go look up penile subincision in Google Images. It's an Aboriginal practice wherein the foreskin is removed, just like Western circumcision, but then the shaft is butterflied. So they cut it from the start of the scrotum all the way up to the tip of the urethra and open up the entire penis. So I don't think we should be subincising our boys, but if cultural reasons are considered an acceptable reason to allow circumcision, I fail to see how we're going to tell the Aboriginals to cut it out, should any of them decide to move to the United States. Admittedly, this is not a major issue right now, but I do think it's grotesque, and I think it illustrates this point that, you know, you can do all sorts of gross things to a boy's penis, and at some point you have to draw a line, and you kind of have to do it in an ethically, morally consistent manner. And it just seems to me that allowing male circumcision opens the door to penile subincision or other atrocities. Seriously, go look it up. Okay, so we used to also cut out the tonsils and the appendix preemptively to prevent disease. We stopped doing it. Why we stopped doing that, I couldn't figure out. I couldn't figure out whether it was just the medical community deciding that they don't need to preemptively do amputative surgery, or whether it was the consequences of that amputative surgery. As you can see, there's some evidence to suggest that removing the tonsils or the appendix may well increase the likelihood of childhood leukemia. This is sort of a pattern you see in the human body. When you start cutting pieces off of it, it doesn't work as well. Here's another study, same thing. This one was in Germany. And as you may suspect, the medical community doesn't really want to find out that they've hurt a bunch of children who are now grown-ups. And so there's not a ton of research into this. They've basically just stopped doing preemptive tonsillectomies and appendectomies, and they don't really want to talk about it anymore. Finally, the appendix, we now know, or we now hypothesize, that the appendix acts as a storehouse for valuable bacteria, which are enlisted when the gastrointestinal tract loses its beneficial gut flora. So you get bad diarrhea, or you take a dose of antibiotics, and your body has a way to restore the beneficial gut flora. So, where we are so far. Circumcision is one of many preemptive amputative surgeries that we've done to children, and in fact, it appears to be the last in the West, and the reason we've stopped all the others was because in each case, it was found that amputation may well harm the children. In foreign countries, women cite health reasons for female genital cutting. We do not accept those justifications for female genital cutting in the United States, and there is a ban up until the point where a woman becomes the age of majority, 18, and that's precisely what I would like to see happen for boys as well. And it's unfortunate. Well, the 14th Amendment has been really interestingly applied in this case. Anyway, amputation is backline medicine. It's a last resort, and the infections that it is purported to treat can be treated, and for girls are treated, with antibiotics. So why a ban? Well, circumcision harms the penis by killing a section of it, and we'll find out how much later. All children should be protected from parents who want to cut off parts of their bodies. And this is the frame that I would propose to you, frame game. Should people be protected from parents who want to cut off parts of their bodies? As a Western man, I presume that your answer is generally yes, but when it comes to part of a boy's penis, your position up until this point in life has been, no, there's no reason to protect boys from that. And I hope that perhaps you might reconsider that perspective by the end of this video. To reiterate, I think the entire body of a child should be protected from amputation, barring some medical indication for that. So now we get to my timeline. Some background that I think would be helpful is that in the 1800s, they didn't have germ theory yet. They had a bunch of different theories, and one of them was called the nervous excitation theory of illness or disease. This was the idea that sexual excitement can cause disease. Okay? That's what they thought did it. As a result of this model, someone named Graham developed the graham crackers because he believed that spicy foods might sexually excite small children, causing them to masturbate and develop epilepsy, stroke, paralysis, blindness, hairy palms, partial or full paralysis of the legs, cross eyes. Any of those things could be caused by eating spicy foods, which would motivate the children to masturbate wildly. And so Graham came up with some more mellow foods, like graham crackers. Dr. Kellogg was similarly worried for the children, and so he developed cornflakes, which are a very mild corn-based cereal. So I've starred the points we're going to go over. Like I said, this is going to be a long video, and it ends whenever you want it to end. That is, feel free to tap out early. In the last 3 minutes or so, I've got some questions for you. But I think it's important to look at what the medical literature says about circumcision. So I'm not going to read all of these, but I will read most of them. In 1845, Edward H. Dixon declares that circumcision prevents masturbation. In 1855, Jonathan Hutchinson publishes his theory that circumcision prevents syphilis. 1865, Nathaniel Heckford claims that circumcision cures epilepsy. 1870, Louis A. Sayer publishes a paper proving that circumcision cures epilepsy. 1871, M.J. Moses declares that Jews are immune to masturbation because of circumcision. 1875, Sayer declares that foreskin causes curvature of the spine, paralysis of the bladder, and clubfoot. 1881, Maximilian Landesberg announces that circumcision cures eye problems that he believes were caused by masturbation. 1886, William G. Eggleston declares that foreskin causes crossed eyes. 1888, John Harvey Kellogg promotes circumcision as punishment for boys to discourage them from masturbating. 1890. Oh, and that is also where the term self-abuse comes from, if you've heard that term for masturbation. 1890, William D. Gentry declares that circumcision cures blindness, deafness, and dumbness. 1891, Jonathan Hutchinson declares that foreskin encourages boys to masturbate. 1893, Mark J. Lehman demands immediate implementation of mass circumcision of all American boys. 1894, P.C. Rimondino says circumcising blacks will help prevent them from raping whites. 1898, T. Scott McFarland says he has, quote, circumcised as many girls as boys and always with happy results. Well, what's good for the boys is probably good for the girls. 1900, Jonathan Hutchinson advises circumcision as a way to decrease the pleasure of sex and hence to discourage sexual immorality. This argument, I mean, you see it above in Rimondino, this idea that the foreskin is sexually pleasurable and we need to remove it to reduce sexual pleasure so that men will be less dangerous to women or less immoral. This is an argument that Jews have been making in the Talmud for hundreds, if not thousands of years. Maimonides is a good example of this, but in this presentation we're going to focus on the medical literature, but Klopper goes into quotes from Jewish leaders, and I think he did a really good job. Well, Frame Game has already seen that. I would suggest everybody watch it, at least for that section. 1901, Ernest G. Mark notes that the pleasurable sensations that are elicited from the extremely sensitive inner lining of the foreskin may encourage a child to masturbate, which is why he recommends circumcision, since it lessens the sensitiveness of the organ. Uh, Obviously, when everybody had a foreskin, or almost everybody did, it was common knowledge in the medical community and in the general public that this part of the penis felt really good to touch, which is why they targeted it for ablation. Now that fewer people have foreskins, the medical community generally doesn't even acknowledge that the foreskin is sexually sensitive. Or the doctors I've met have denied this claim from Ernest G. Mark. Okay, 1915, Benjamin E. Dawson says that since the clitoral hood is the source of many neuroses, female circumcision is necessary. 1918, Bell Eskridge concludes circumcision will relieve one of the greatest causes of masturbation in girls. From the article, Why Not Circumcise the Girl as Well as the Boy? Interesting perspective. 1926. Abraham L. Walbarst claims that circumcision prevents penile cancer. I actually know a bit about this study. At the time when they did this study, there were very few circumcised men. And the men who showed up with penile cancer still had their foreskins. Today, when they try to reproduce this study, they don't find a difference between circumcised and uncircumcised men. In any event, the rate of penile cancer is extremely low, and so even if circumcision does prevent penile cancer, I would prefer not to be circumcised. But that's just me. Anyway, trying not to moral fag here. 1930, Norton Henry Baer claims that he has cured a boy of epilepsy by circumcising him. Given that the epilepsy is in the brain and circumcision is down by the penis, that must have been one hell of a circumcision. 1934, Aaron Goldstein and Hiram S. Yellen invent and mass market the Gomco clamp. That's short for Goldstein Medical Company clamp, Gomco clamp, which makes it easier for doctors to cut off even more skin than was removed in traditional circumcisions. So in 1934, circumcision drastically changed and became much more radical. Before that, the type of circumcision that was done did cut off a good bit of tissue, but it actually cut off less tissue than was removed, say, 2,000 or 3,000 years ago by the Jews. Originally, Jewish circumcision just removed the overhang, but when Jews in the Roman Empire wanted to participate, or maybe it was in the Greek, anyway, they wanted to participate in the games, which were performed naked, and the glans penis was considered grotesque or vulgar to be exposed. So Jewish men during that time started attaching weights to their remaining foreskin to pull it forward so that they could participate in the games. The rabbis didn't like that, so they implemented a much more radical form of circumcision. And then in 1934, Mr. Goldstein and Yellen came up with an even more radical procedure. 1935. R.W. Cockshut demands that all boys be circumcised in order to desensitize the penis and promote chastity. 1941. Alan F. Guttmacher promotes mass circumcision as a means of blunting male sexual sensitivity. He also spreads the false claim that a baby's foreskin must be forcibly retracted and scrubbed daily. This false claim has led to a great deal of phimosis and irritation and infection in baby boys that doctors then come in and say, well, since it's so irritated, we have to remove part of his penis. I believe the term for this is iatrogenic harm. It still occurs to this day, and I believe there have been lawsuits over it. But I don't know. Keeps happening. 1942, Abraham Ravitch claims that circumcision prevents prostate cancer. 1949, Eugene H. Hand declares that circumcision prevents venereal disease and cancer of the tongue. Cancer of the tongue? 1949, Douglas Gardner points out that the previous year's cases of infant circumcision deaths were not necessary given the lack of medical justification for circumcision. This paper helped encourage the National Health Service to drop coverage for infant circumcision, which led to the practical elimination of non-religious circumcision in the United Kingdom. All the way back in 1949, the UK said there are babies dying for this. There's no medical justification for it. We should not pay for it. That makes a lot of sense. Medicare still does cover circumcision, though, in the United States, in some areas. I don't know how many states. Anyway, 51. Abraham Ravitch invents claim that circumcision prevents cervical cancer in women. 1953. R.L. Miller and D.C. Snyder unleash their plans to circumcise all male babies immediately after birth while still in the delivery room to prevent masturbation and provide, quote, immunity to nearly all physical and mental illness, end quote. That's quite a circumcision. 56. Raymond Creelman invents the circumstraint, which straps down and immobilizes the baby's arms and legs. 1958. Oh, that's pictured above. 58. C.F. MacDonald says, the same reasons that apply for the circumcision of males are generally valid when considered for the female. On a related note, this country actually did perform circumcisions of baby girls, particularly the ones who were masturbating in their cribs, or Kellogg would apply carbolic acid to their clitoral hoods, or other such procedures to discourage them from masturbating. The Blue Cross Blue Shield, a major local insurance company in the state of Maryland, paid for the procedure up until, I think, the 70s, but it might have been up until the 80s. You can look that up. I think I found the date on Wikipedia, so this is not like a buried thing. 59. W.G. Rathman finds that among the many benefits of female circumcision is that it will make the clitoris easier for the husband to find. How thoughtful? 1966. Masters and Johnson claim that there is no difference in sensitivity between penises with and without foreskin. Their work helps propagate the medical dogma that circumcision has no effect on sexuality. It helps it go practically unquestioned for nearly the next 4 decades. 69. Morris Fishbein calls for circumcision to prevent nervousness and, of course, also masturbation. 1971. Abraham Ravitch claims that circumcision prevents cancer of the bladder and the rectum. 1971. The American Academy of Pediatrics, they'll come up a lot. They have a committee on fetus and newborn issues. Oh, and newborns. They issue a warning to the nation that there are no valid medical indications for circumcision in the neonatal period. 73. R. Dogger, Melvin Seltzer, and Jack Lapides declare that anyone who disagrees with their agenda to impose mass circumcision on America is deluded. That was the Journal of Urology. They got published for that. 75. AAP Task Force on Circumcision declares there are no medical indications for routine circumcisions, and the procedure cannot be considered an essential component of healthcare. 76. Benjamin Spock, after recommending circumcision for 30 years, revises his best-selling parenting book. I strongly recommend leaving the foreskin alone. Parents should insist on convincing reasons for circumcision, and there are no convincing reasons that I know of. 1985. Thomas E. Wiswell claims that circumcision prevents urinary tract infections. You know, that disease that can be treated with a little bit of antibiotics. 1986. Aaron J. Fink claims that circumcision prevents AIDS. Just as an aside, the United States has the highest rate of AIDS and circumcision, so if it does prevent HIV infection, it doesn't have much of an effect. If you don't want to get HIV, you can get circumcised. Well, you can not be circumcised, but wear a condom during sex. Or you can get circumcised and then you still have to wear a condom during sex, but it doesn't feel as good. Your choice. Oh, no, wait, sorry. It's your parents' choice. 1988. Aaron J. Fink invents the falsehood that circumcision prevents neonatal group B streptococcal disease. So you can prevent strep throat in your child. Oops. By circumcising your child. Just the boys, I assume. Under the direction of Edgar J. Shane, the American Academy of Pediatrics Task Force on Circumcision declares circumcision is necessary. 1991. Shane tries and fails to convince the European countries to institute mass circumcision. Also 91. Fink declares mass circumcision is necessary to prevent sand getting into the soldiers' foreskins. Whew. Oh yeah. What religion do you think Edgar Shane is? 96. J.R. Taylor finds... Oh, this is where the medical community starts to slowly turn away. Taylor finds that the average amount of amputated foreskin was nearly half of the total penile skin. So your parents opted to have just about half of the surface area of your penis removed. But if you have no problem with that, God bless. 97. Edgar Shane, back at it, tries and fails again to convince European countries to institute mass circumcision. 97. Janice Lander discovers that circumcision without anesthesia is traumatic for babies. Before this, almost all infant circumcisions were done without anesthetic due to the prevalent belief among circumcisers that babies are not capable of feeling significant pain, and if they could, it doesn't matter, since they won't be able to remember it either way. 98. Howard Stang, inventor of an upright circumcision restraint, fails to mention this conflict of interest in his article promoting infant circumcision. 99. Taylor, after studying the foreskin's specialized innervation, concludes that it is the primary erogenous tissue necessary for normal sexual function. Also 99, the AAP comes back to the table, Task Force on Circumcision. It reviews 40 years of medical studies, and it concludes that the potential medical benefits of newborn male circumcision are not sufficient to recommend routine neonatal circumcision. This report is also the first time the AAP has acknowledged, after decades of doctors mindlessly repeating the belief that babies don't feel significant pain, that circumcision without anesthesia is traumatic, and if circumcision is to be done, anesthesia should be used. Some highlights. Hygiene. there is little evidence to affirm the association between circumcision status and optimum penile hygiene. STDs. Behavioral factors appear to be far more important than circumcision status. Again, you can be intact and wear a condom, or you can have half of the surface area of your penis removed and still wear a condom. Cancer. In a developed country such as the United States, penile cancer is a rare disease, and the risk of penile cancer developing in an uncircumcised man, although increased compared with a circumcised man, is low. The rate of penile cancer is, I think, less than 1 in 1,000, and it usually happens right at the end of life. So, any intact friends out there listening, if you just get this itch, you're like, oh my god, I could get penile cancer. First of all, just wash yourself daily and it probably won't happen. But if you're really worried about it, you can actually put off this whole circumcision procedure until you're like 60 or 70. I mean, if you're real worried about it, do it at 60. But you could have basically most of a lifetime of full sexual pleasure with your penis and then deal with this later. Or you could do chemo, or... I mean, shit, if you get penile cancer, you could just get the part that has the cancer excised. I guess I'm not really selling circumcision that well. UTIs. Breastfeeding was shown to have a threefold protective effect on the incidence of UTI in a sample of uncircumcised infants. However, breastfeeding status has not been evaluated systematically in studies assessing UTI and circumcision status. So earlier UTI studies results were confounded. Even if their numbers were accurate, in order to prevent one UTI during the first year of life by circumcising a baby boy, approximately 195 babies who will not get a UTI would need to be circumcised. Also, infant girls commonly develop UTIs, in some studies, at even higher rates than infant boys, and the standard treatment for them is antibiotics, which work just as well for infant boys with UTIs. The AAP concludes this section, noting that the absolute risk of developing a UTI in an uncircumcised male infant is low, at most, approximately 1%. Finally, ethics. Here they say, while even though cutting off part of your baby's genitalia is not essential to the child's current well-being, they are perfectly fine with parents and doctors using cultural tradition as justification. Note that they do not mention whether they also think cultural tradition is an acceptable reason to anesthetize infant girls and then cut off their clitoral hoods. This isn't going to get into the 2012 AAP task force, but just for a flavor of some of the bias, well, I shouldn't go there yet, but I will say one of the 8 people on the panel was actually supporting a form of female genital cutting being legalized, I believe in California, back in like 2010 or so. Not a terribly invasive form. The plan was to just allow doctors to prick or nick the female clitoral hood. But yeah, they do sometimes support female genital cutting. Not amputation, just a little snip. 2002. WK Nom extends the storage life of specialized cell cultures derived from freshly harvested neonatal foreskin tissue. Since the 1980s, some amputated infant foreskins have been sold without the knowledge of the parents to biomedical companies for research and even use in commercial cosmetic products such as anti-wrinkle creams. Ryan McAllister in Elephant in the Hospital did a really good job documenting this. The fibroblast and other derivatives are actually sold by major biomedical companies on the open market. So if you know the products to look for, you can find this on the open internet. 2003, Edgar Schein, at it again, steps up pressure on American Academy of Pediatrics to reverse its policy on circumcision, claiming that circumcision prevents AIDS. 2005, this is that study we talked about earlier. Stallings finds that HIV rates are significantly lower in circumcised women. Also note, there was no WHO call for mass female circumcision to help prevent AIDS. 2007. R.C. Bailey ends his study early with the conclusion touting circumcision as a vaccine that prevents HIV infection. Note that this and other similar studies were widely reported throughout the American media. Other people have dug into the Bailey study. There are systemic flaws in the way that the study was set up, and those flaws are large enough that any one of several of them could explain the difference in HIV contraction between the circumcised and intact group. But other people have ripped that apart. You can look into it if you want. 2007, L. DeWitt finds that Langerhans cells found in the foreskin are a natural barrier to HIV infection. Note that this and other similar studies were widely ignored throughout the American media. 2007. Sorrells tests the relative sensitivity of the penis and finds that the foreskin is the most sensitive part of the penis and the glans is the least. The nerve density of the glans, the head of the penis, is approximately equivalent to the nerve density on the heel of your foot. I usually compare it to an on or an off switch. It either has enough sensation that it feels good or it doesn't. The foreskin has many different feelings that can come from it. People who've got one recommend them highly and generally don't like to get themselves circumcised. So, here's what I take from this timeline. Circumcision was implemented to reduce sexual pleasure in men and in women in the hopes that this would reduce masturbation and nervous excitation. Jews have had a large influence on this debate. There's been no recognition of any conflict of interest. The AAP actually did another study, another task force in 2012. I alluded to that before. At least 4 out of the 8 panelists were Jewish, and they've said a lot of things to suggest that they designed their findings in such a way as to be able to justify the ongoing practice, because the report came out in the midst of a ballot initiative to ban the practice. So this was sort of an explicitly political document that they've had to sort of walk back various parts of. Foreskin does appear to be sexually sensitive. This was known in the medical community 100 years ago when most people still had their foreskins. So thank you to anybody who watched all the way through. Please let me know in the comments section. Do you wish you had been given a choice in this matter? Will you allow your children to have a choice? Does it make sense for your parents to decide how much penis you get to keep? And just a tongue-in-cheek trolling question I'll just throw in. So circumcision removes about half of the surface area, or about 1/3 of the volume of the penis. Now, to go from male to female, you cut off the whole penis, and there's hormones and blah 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 blah. So if you got 1/3 of your volumetric penis removed, and you got half of the surface area removed, how much of a man are you? Honest question. I mean, it can't be more than 70%. Anyway, have a good day.